but let me just very quickly review last week, because we need to remind ourselves, and also maybe there are some new people today, but we use the word herbs and spices in our society as one word, herbs. They are quite different. And herbs refer to the leafy parts of the plant, spices to the bark, the root, the stem, the flower, the bud, the extract from these. While herbs are viewed as, quote, natural, it doesn't mean they're totally 100% safe. There can be some dangers, as we saw, and they're a complex mixture. They can contain cousins, family members that are similar and have similar activities. This can compound the effect, or it could in fact enhance the longevity of the action. Of course, the herbs are often mixed with a lot of fibrous part of the plants, which will slow down absorption, so that the direct path into the bloodstream is slower, which means they are going to have less problems. There can be a great variation in the herbs because of growth conditions, and we need to keep that in mind. If something is working or not working, it may be that the company didn't prepare the doctrine of signatures. Like cures like is not true. So because something looks like a liver or has red juice doesn't mean that it's good for the liver or for the heart. There are certain groups we mentioned: the elderly, the pregnant, lactating women, and small children. One should be very cautious. There are interactions. An example is the valerian, which people use for sleep and accentuate the effect of barbiturates. And because of these interactions, it's important that healthcare practitioners know what you're taking, how much, and how often, because it can drastically impact the effect of their intervention. You must recognize that herbs are not regulated by the FDA. They are like supplements in terms of the way they are looked at. So while health claims cannot be made for them, they can use such things as support bone health or something like that. And you should only use those that have been standardized against an active constituent. Otherwise, you don't really know what you're getting. Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. And I think we will see today that that is true, that there are many foods which are medicinal value. And basically, the outline of today's lecture is looking at herbs and spices for management of cardiovascular problems, for glycemic control, and then for cancer chemopreventive activity. That will be the order we do them, 2, 3, and 1. So let's begin. First of all, with cholesterol levels. There are half a dozen or so which are known. Beta-glucan, which is a component of food. As with all viscous fibers, soluble fibers, they increase the viscosity of the material in the intestinal tract, small intestine, stomach, and this will slow down the absorption of fat. Oats and barley are good sources, and the beta-glucan will reduce both total and LDL cholesterol. Then plant sterols, or phytosterols as they're called, beta-sitosterol being the major one, stigmasterol secondary one. These also interfere with the absorption of the animal sterol, cholesterol, and they also increase bile acid secretion, which impacts on cholesterol, since cholesterol is used to synthesize bile acids. So overall, these lower blood lipids, and we are familiar today with these being added to certain margarines that claim to be heart healthy and manage blood lipids. Well, it is the phytosterols that they extract from plants to put into the margarine to achieve that. And in the order of 1.5 to 6 grams a day, you get therapeutic effect. Another soluble fiber is carob gum, or as it's more commonly called in food products or in supplements, locust bean gum. It's pictured there. This also inhibits fat absorption. They add this to many products, such as plant-based milk alternatives and yogurts and so forth, and it can lower both LDL and triglycerides. Cordyceps is a mushroom. It has antioxidant polysaccharides, which also can suppress LDL cholesterol oxidation, as well as lowering cholesterol. The importance of suppressing the oxidation is that this is believed to be the major process by which the cholesterol in the plaque is laid down in the oxidized form. Garlic, with its sulfide compounds, diallyl disulfide and trisulfide, inhibits HMG-CoA reductase. This is the rate determining step in the biological production in the body of cholesterol. So if you can manage that enzyme, you can control cholesterol production. This is very effective. 1 clove a day, usually it isn't instant. This is a common characteristic of herbal products, in that usually you don't get an immediate effect like with aspirin or something, but maybe 6 or 8 weeks are needed before you see significant reduction of blood lipids. Polycosanol is another product that can impact on blood lipids, lowering cholesterol by, again, interfering with that key enzyme, HMG-CoA reductase. This is isolated from sugarcane wax as well as a number of other plant oils. These are long-chain primary alcohols of the 28 and 30 carbon lengths, so they're very long, even longer than the long-chain fatty acids that we're familiar with in fish oils. And in some cases, this has been shown to be as effective as a statin. And of course, as we have seen with most herbs, the side effects are minimal compared to regular pharmaceuticals. Psyllium, which we are familiar with as Metamucil. People take it for lowering cholesterol and also for constipation. The husk of the psyllium seed, Antago species, is very rich in soluble fiber, and it interferes again with cholesterol absorption and the disposal of bile acids. So removal of bile acids in the feces is a way of, in a sense, of draining the body of cholesterol, because cholesterol is converted to bile acids. Red yeast rice, this is a growth on rice. The main compound there, monocolin K, again inhibits that enzyme. And while it lowers blood lipids, it may also reduce C-reactive protein and improve flow-mediated dilation. And then we have spirulina, which I think is very commonly known, a green algae type material. Powder, it comes as a powder. And phycocyanin is the active compound here. And it inhibits lipase as well as interfering with cholesterol metabolism, and hence decreases your LDL cholesterol and triglycerides. So you see there's a whole host of plant products that are available for lowering blood lipids. This is just a extra picture of garlic. This is how you often find it hanging in Europe in marketplaces. It reduces fatty deposits in the artery wall. As we'll see later, it also has an anti-clotting effect. It lowers blood lipids, as we've mentioned, without changing the HDL. And it may have some impact on triglycerides and high blood pressure. In other words, some clinical studies show an effect, others do not. But who knows what your chances are. The cumin, which is the intensely bright yellow material in the tuber, turmeric, which you have pictured there, same family as ginger. This also lowers blood lipids and cholesterol, but it raises HDL, which is unusual in all of the products that we've been mentioning so far. It also inhibits LDL oxidation. And when we come to blood clotting mechanisms, we'll see that it also inhibits thromboxane. This is the material which is regulated by COX enzyme, cyclooxygenase, which is definitely involved with platelet aggregation. The cumin also has a mild effect on inhibiting myocardial infarction damage caused by ischemia, and inhibits the proliferation of vascular smooth muscle cells. I'm sorry, I was updating these slides the last couple of days, and somehow some of them are missing references, but if any of you are interested, we could provide you with references at some later point. Oops. Just to conclude that section, we haven't given a complete list. There are foods like almond, avocado, barley, flax, and soy, which are well documented to lower blood lipids. And then there are other products that are mentioned here: lemongrass, green tea, ginseng, prickly pear, which aren't on the grade B list, if you know the A, B, C, D list. C list are kind of unsure, questionable. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So I didn't describe these in detail, but these may have some value for some persons. Now, moving to hypertension, there are a number that, not as many, that regulate blood pressure. We mentioned garlic, not the aged garlic that is commonly available, kyolic. We're talking about the clove or the powder. The powder is a good representation of garlic. And in a number of cases, as documented in this 2020 paper, significant decrease in both diastolic and systolic pressure, less than 10 points, but this may be important for somebody who's on the low end. Of course, somebody higher up might be glad to decrease 10 points also. Garlic seems to act on the nitric oxide system, which is involved with the vasculature the elasticity of blood vessels, and that clearly would be involved with systolic blood pressure. Ginseng also has a mild effect. The ginsenosides, which are saponins, these are steroid-like materials. These have vasodilatory effects. Ginseng, particularly popular amongst Asian populations. And then something that has become more common in the last few years in this country is hibiscus. The flowers, other cultures, the Indian, the Ayurvedic, Vedic, and the Chinese medical systems have used hibiscus for a long, long time. The bright red, remember that, that's an indication. The berries, the strawberries, the raspberries, and so forth, they are similarly endowed with the antioxidant anthocyanins. These are some of the most potent antioxidants in the plant kingdom. Hibiscus inhibits ACE, an important enzyme involved with blood pressure regulation. Hibiscus lowers both systolic and diastolic blood pressure in patients with mild to moderate hypertension. Okay, then hawthorn I put here. It's a little questionable. It's probably in the C class category where human studies are lacking, but animal studies certainly show a positive effect of hawthorn, and it is available, as you can see there, in tablet form. Pycnogenol is obtained from the bark of maritime pine tree in Europe, and it is full of different flavonoids, catechin and epicatechin, which are in green tea, and proanthocyanidins, which is the precursor of the anthocyanidins. So it's somewhat related to what we talked about with the hibiscus. And it is similar, these compounds are also found in grapeseed extract. It seems to be becoming more popular lately. And pycnogenol has some vasorelaxant activity, so it's on the list here. And then there's stevia. It has two glycosides, stevioside and riboside A, which we abbreviate to Reb-A. You'll often see that in products. You know, the beverages today, like Coke and Pepsi and so forth and what have you, they list Reb-A. Well, this is the highly sweet glycoside from stevia that they use rather than using sugar. And this has antihypertensive effects, and oral doses of stevia, 1/4 to 1/2 a gram, up to 2 years, will decrease blood pressure. Then moving from hypertension to a third aspect of cardiovascular situation is blood clotting. Now, there are herbs that can increase bleeding or decrease or increase clotting. I should say, these are problems that we have. We may have increased bleeding or increased clotting, and there are herbs that can modify these factors. And of course, the one that we are particularly interested in is managing the clots, diminishing the clots, because when these clots go to a narrowed capillary, narrowed blood vessel, they can block the flow of blood, and when they occur in the brain or in the heart, of course, they can be deadly. And you probably have studied in your biochemistry the coagulation cascade. It has a number or a dozen or more coagulation factors. A number of these require vitamin K for their activation. In the final step, thrombin is converted to fibrinogen, converts fibrinogen into fibrin. And the fibrin forms this mesh, this protein mesh, which the platelets can aggregate to and form the clot. And then there is another protein, plasmin, which is involved with the breaking, the lysis, the separation of the clot, which you want after the cut has healed. And if you have a clot in the body, you would want that would happen to diminish the clot so that there's no life-threatening process. Well, that's just a little background to coagulation. And let's take a look at some herbs that help with diminishing clot formation or platelet aggregation. Again, garlic comes to the forefront. It inhibits platelet clumping and decreases fibrinogen levels. The anti-thrombotic properties of garlic, again, due to these sulfur compounds, which are well defined and chemically analyzed, arginines and the trisulfide and vinyl diathenes. And all of these come from the breakdown of allicin, which comes from alleine. Alleine is in the clove, and garlic can cause a significant reduction in serum thromboxane due to the inhibition of the cyclooxygenase, or OX enzyme as it's called. So the mechanism is known, the compounds that are involved are known, so we can be pretty sure that garlic is effective. The question, which is better, fresh garlic or processed forms? As I mentioned earlier, the powder best represents the fresh garlic if the clove is not used. Enteric-coated powders, of course, help manage the odor. You can use those enteric-coated ones without having a garlic breath. Ginger inhibits platelet thromboxane production as well, and platelet aggregation. In some studies, the compounds here, gingerol and its analogues, there's like half a dozen of them, that you are familiar with the aroma or flavor. These are the compounds that inhibit platelet restriction of platelet aggregation. And there are two diterpene dialdehydes that are well characterized that are known to inhibit thrombosis. This is just an electron microscope picture to show the secretory cell that has these beautiful smell, odor, aroma, locked in within the rhizome. And it's just amazing, the architecture of these plants. Okay, in continuing, not only garlic, but other members of the allium family, to a lesser degree, the shallots and so forth, but onions, with its content of sulfonol disulfides, inhibits thrombosis as well. And then it's been shown a long-term daily intake of rosemary in common time, pictured here, will also have some antithrombotic effect. It's weak, it's mild, but the point is that if we use a variety of these seasoning agents, we get an additive effect altogether, and this can mount up to providing some protection for us. Again, olicosanol, you mentioned the long chain primary alcohols obtained from sugarcane wax, and milk thistle oil, grapeseed, and rice bran oils, is good evidence that it inhibits thromboxane production and hence the aggregation of platelets. Turmeric, the yellow component curcumin, also does the same thing, inhibits thromboxane production and inhibits platelet aggregation. And with turmeric, or with curcumin rather, was it commonly used in Asian dishes for coloring rice and so forth. There is a limited bioavailability of this phenolic compound, curcumin, and it was shown that there are a number of agents which can improve the bioavailability of this compound, and one of them, which has been widely discussed and appears in many of the commercial products that are available in the market now, is piperine, which is an alkaloid from black pepper, and this is added to curcumin, and it makes the availability markedly greater. Okay, so moving to diabetes. 350 million people with diabetes in the world, 26 million in America, and of course that's not counting the pre-diabetics. It's been suggested that probably 1/3 of America either is a diabetic or a pre-diabetic or heading that direction, so we need to take a look. Now, last week I mentioned my visit to the Chelsea Physic Garden in London, the apothecary garden where they grew 500-600 years ago and continued to do it, but of course they don't use the plants now for the hospital, the medical use, but you can still go there and observe them. This Artemis I thought was interesting. This is used as a transgenic plant with external genes inserted into its chromosomes to enable it to produce a medicinal compound. The human insulin-producing gene is introduced to generate insulin for diabetics. I don't know a lot about this, but I just thought it was interesting how useful plants are in managing the growing and production of medicine. Also in the garden, and I'm sorry that plants were hanging over the sign, but this is an Algerian iris, which was used years ago. It reduces the rate of glucose absorption. This was used for the treatment of diabetics. More recent research has shown that it's high in camphorol, which is very commonly found in fruits and vegetables, and it's particularly rich in kale and dill. So there are other sources now other than relying on Algerian iris. Goat's rue contains guanidine, and this is shown in the picture at the top here, and the synthetic drug that was made from that is metformin. And so while this original compound isn't entirely safe or non-toxic, metformin, which is the most popular anti-diabetic drug used today, has a much reduced toxicity in guanidine. So this is just a picture gallery of some of the foods we'll be talking about now, some of the herbal products that have been shown to modify blood glucose or perhaps in some cases stimulate insulin release. Beta-glucan, again, that we mentioned earlier, because of its nature as a soluble fiber, it and lower cholesterol, as well as lowering blood glucose. That's typical of all soluble fibers, does both. And this, therefore, is useful for glycemic control. As we mentioned earlier, oats and barley are great sources. Sorghum and rye to a much lesser degree. And there are various species of mushrooms, reishi, for example, and others, which are useful source of beta-glucan. Then ginseng, as we mentioned earlier, it's 1 to 3% in the root of ginsenosides, and this elicits an increased secretion of insulin. It may also increase glycogen synthesis by the liver. If that takes place, of course, that's pulling glucose out of the bloodstream and therefore lowering blood glucose. And it can accelerate hepatic lipogenesis, so making of fat, and again, the disappearance of blood glucose. Ginseng reduces postprandial glycemic response because of all of these factors. And then we have the plant Gymnema sylvestre. This also seems to act by enhancing the secretion of insulin. That's been shown from clinical trials in type 2 diabetic patients who have a hyperglycemic effect because of that. The active components are in the leaf. These are saponins, or better known as triterpene glycosides. And the major three are gymnemic acid 5 and 7 and gymnoside B. So again, readily available on the market for diabetics to use as an adjunct. And then we come back to stevia, the two glycosides we mentioned before, stevioside and Rev-A. As I mentioned before, 200 to 300 times sweeter than sucrose. So for those who want to avoid sucrose in their cooking, you can now go to any supermarket and buy yourself a packet container. And in addition to the fact that it doesn't cause a rise in blood glucose like sugar does, because you're using 200 to 300 times less, and it also has an impact on the pancreas. It stimulates the pancreatic beta cells to secrete insulin. Studies have shown that it decreases plasma glucose, and stevioside particularly decreases postprandial glucose levels after one eats. If stevioside is added, of course, you get 20% lowering of the blood glucose curve. Then there's cinnamon. This was a study done in Pakistan, 10 individuals in each of these 6 groups. One group getting 1 gram a day, 3 grams a day, 6 grams a day, or 3 placebo groups. Fasting serum glucose, this is in millimoles per liter, at time 0, and then after 6 weeks. And this is the change. You see with cinnamon, there's all a significant reduction in the vicinity of 20 to 30%. For the placebo, there was no significant change. It seems like 1 gram is as good as 6 grams, so interesting to know. Then they did experiment with pudding, consuming 300 grams of pudding, which is a starch digested to glucose, and the area under the blood glucose curve is shown here at different time intervals, from half an hour up to 2 hours. And then the experiment was completed with the pudding plus 6 grams of cinnamon. And you can see that the area under the curve, or the postprandial blood glucose response, is about a half. Okay, this was 15 healthy people that were given pudding, or the pudding with 1 gram of cinnamon or with 3 grams of cinnamon. And then you're looking at the insulin levels after 60 minutes, 90 minutes, and 120 minutes. And you can see the insulin with the 3 grams of cinnamon decreases, and after 2 hours, that postprandial plasma insulin area is significantly less. This is another experiment. I'm looking at military base of children, adults, and geriatric people with or without cinnamon in their usual care. A baseline hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of long-term blood glucose, and then after 3 months. And then the difference, you can see with the control, there's no significant difference in that slight decrease. With the 1 gram of cinnamon, highly significant decrease. And then the Chinese study, this was with people that actually had diabetes, looking at 120 milligrams, very small amount, or a third of a gram of cinnamon extract, looking at fasting blood glucose as well as hemoglobin A1C. And you can see in all cases, the small amount or the larger amount of cinnamon, there are significant reductions, and there is a dose effect, a greater reduction in both parameters with the greater amount, 90 days. And this is another picture showing a cereal with cinnamon, and you get a reduction, 23.6% reduction after 120 minutes. Then moving to curcumin, we see here 240 subjects with pre-diabetics were given 1.5 grams of this substance, curcumin, 9 months. And this is the group getting the active compound. This is the placebo group. And you can see that none went on to become diabetics, whereas in the placebo group, significant number did. In terms of beta cell pancreatic function, those with taking the curcumin had a better insulin response, and in terms of insulin resistance, it was reduced in the curcumin group. Again, it's a win-win situation of that. Then fenugreek, again, this is rich in fiber, soluble fiber, lactomanins in particular, so you would expect what we've said before. It reduces elevated blood glucose and elevated cholesterol levels, so you can bake it into a lot of bakery goods and get benefit from that. The extract was more effective in one experiment than a standard drug, albutamide, so active compound. Now, this is the compound extracted from fenugreek, and you can see diabetic rabbits up here. And after 15 days of G2, which is the compound extracted from fenugreek, the blood glucose response was decreased from the orange down to the red, which is almost identical to the blue, which is the normal rabbit. So fenugreek extract converted the diabetic rabbits essentially to normal rabbits in terms of blood glucose response. I see our time is getting close to the end. I've got just 1 or 2 more pictures on diabetes, and you can tell me whether to continue with cancer or if we need to finish off at 1 o'clock and make up next time. So our bitomalin is shown here. It's very popular amongst West Indian and Asian populations. For people with diabetes, it is commonly used in Ayurvedic medicine in India. significantly lowers blood glucose, probably by increasing glycogen synthesis, and the active components which are considered are a protein in the seeds and some steroidal glycosides out in the fruits. And experiments have shown that when you juice these, you get a more potent effect. Maybe the seeds are included, and the polypeptide P may be more reactive than the saponins. But anyway, the juice formulations seem to be more effective at lowering blood sugar and your hemoglobin A1C value than the sun-dried fruit.
Doctor,
Yeah.
Maybe we finish the bitter melon and then we continue next week.
Okay. You finish right now or one or two?
Finish the slides about bitter melon, just to be complete.
I think the diabetes, there's just one or two more pictures here. I'm losing my screen at the top here. So I'm not, well, this is bitter melon. Okay, bitter melon. Again, we can see the fasting blood glucose and insulin levels, adding 400 milligrams of bitter melon powder or comparing it with the drug, diabetic drug metformin, and you can see the fasting blood glucose with the bitter melon is reduced, similarly to the drug after, we'll be looking at the middle column here, reductions, not quite as potent, but heading in the right direction. And then prickly pear, I think we're finishing here. The prickly pear, both the pads, Nopalis, and the fruit, the tuna, are commonly used in Mexico and Peru, maybe other places, but at least I'm familiar. I've been there and I've seen them use these treatment for type 2 diabetes. And the most a popular form that seems to be active is the Opuntia streptocantha, high in soluble fiber, again, useful in reducing blood glucose and LDL cholesterol. So let's finish there, and we'll come back next time.